Hello, everyone, and welcome to In the Flow with Jessica Kay and your spiritual CFO, Robin Wilt. And we are here today in the midst of solar flares and on the other side of the eclipses and what else? Neptune and Aries. So, welcome to March 30th, at least March 30th for us.
Um, yes, welcome to March 30th. It's funny because I think that this time of the year is typically a time of the year where I have big changes. So if I was still married, this was actually my would have been my wedding anniversary. And then for a few years, oh, that was the other funny part. I let's actually chat a little bit about that because we were like Jessica and I were just gonna flow today and like this is coming through. So when I signed my divorce paperwork, we actually happened to sign our divorce paperwork on our anniversary, which was like
Wow.
the weirdest thing ever. And then for a few years after that, like it was a very charged day for me. Like I would have really weird experiences like on or around that day. So then I got to the point where I noticed it and I was like, okay, I want to have like better experiences on this day. So it's actually something that I kind of like consciously worked on. And I was like, all right, I want to have, more positive energy on this day or this, time period. So I think there's like, what's that book by Bruce Lipton? I think, doesn't he talk about that, about the, um, how we can have those patterns or those themes show up, like karmically or, what's that word? I don't know. We are definitely still in Mercury retrograde because I'm having a hard time talking or braining. Um,
When in therapy, we call it trauma anniversaries. So
uh,
we can get stuck, and that's like a big deal. Like, there may be a time of year where, a friend of mine said, yeah, I don't do well when the azaleas are blooming. It's like, okay, well, like that's something to unpack. So
mhm.
awareness only goes so far, right? You have to then take the next steps of saying, okay, I've noticed this pattern and I want to do something different. And by doing that, you also have to go in and kind of unpack the trauma around it to allow there to be something positive.
Yeah. So I guess, right, not knowing anything at the time, I just got tired of having shitty things happen. And not like when I got married, it wasn't shitty, but having the divorce and then like the years after that, that it, brought stuff up. Our intention can be really powerful, just saying to the universe, like, hey, I've noticed this. I would like to like break this energy or break this habit. So I'm happy to say that the last couple of years, like I've had, a much better experience. And like I actually have a few friends that have birthdays today. Um, I've had a really nice day today. So it's cool to like to see like how we have those shifts. So talk, can you share a little bit about that, like the trauma anniversary?
I would
So
love
is it
to. So it's interesting because, I do work with veterans. So for them, it's usually very clear. Like they know, like, this is the day that my friend died, or, when they were in battle. So that's very clear for them. And it has huge repercussions. Um, the interesting thing is that for people that have had childhood stuff happen to them, it's not so clear.
Mhm.
So that's where the clarity, you know, awareness is only so much, right? But even being clear, so it's trauma anniversary, so like the same time every year. And that's where when we would see people like in mental health, I've worked in mental health for like 20 years. When you see people not doing well, same time of year, it's like something happened. Something happened on that date. Something happened around that time of year, whether it's, when the azaleas bloom. Like there is something. And that's where I've always really tuned into that when somebody says, "Oh, yeah, when this," or, when there's specific things. So if you think about it, we are bringing in stimuli at all times: smells, taste, touch, um, the other senses that have sight, the other senses that have, left me. So all of those senses come in to form a memory. So it could even be the smell of something that triggers you. Uh, so there's so many different pieces. And interestingly enough, like for me, it's always been about having a trauma informed like counseling or way that I go about. And it can be in so many different ways. And I was recently talking to somebody who does Qigong, and she says, yes, I do trauma informed Qigong because energy moving in the body can trigger people, who've had negative experiences. And I was like, I've never thought about trauma informed Qigong, but in my mind, where we live in society now is traumatic. So I believe that everybody is suffering from some trauma, whether it's, meets the level of wartime or sexual abuse or physical abuse. Like everybody has some kind of trauma, even accidents, like car accidents, those kind of things can be traumatic. And the great thing about, um, not the great thing, the one of the interesting, this say trauma makes me excited because I know that everybody has it. I've had, you know, any kind of trauma, you can list it, other than I haven't been in wartime, but I've experienced sexual trauma, I've experienced physical abuse, I've experienced emotional abuse. So I've experienced all these different types of trauma. So when we can get in and understand like, oh, like my reactions are because of something. I'm not just crazy or I'm not, losing my mind, but to realize like, oh, yes, that thing that happened to me in my childhood, in my adulthood, a couple of years ago is impacting who I am today. And then we can go and find those buttons and we can kind of undo them. So that's where, as somebody who has experienced trauma, like I realize like there's certain smells, like, oh, okay, I'm having a moment. I need to just be with myself. And so all of that to say it's about self-love and it's about paying attention and it's about self-forgiveness. And I think we've, talked about this a little bit, but we oftentimes we want to blame ourselves for putting ourselves in those situations where something bad could happen to us. We don't have control over stuff like that. So when we're triggered, it's about, falling back and taking care of ourselves. And I actually read somewhere it's like we shouldn't be in a world that doesn't trigger you. We should be aware of how to help ourselves when we are triggered. Because we're, people are being constantly triggered. I'm being constantly triggered. It's like, how do I sit with my nervous system and realize, okay, I'm triggered right now. I need to go take care of myself. And just take that time. So long, long discussion, but I hope I answered your question. And what do you think about all that, Robin?
It makes sense to me. It's funny because I want to go back to the forgiveness thing for a moment. I feel like I'm always doing work on myself, you know. um, Part of it's just how I'm wired, and then I think part of it is, I want to be, I shouldn't say better, but better, better and like more embodied or more healed, tomorrow than I was yesterday. Um, but it's interesting how even that can become, that can be traumatic, where it's like if you're constantly thinking you're something that needs to be improved upon, like it's that balance, right? Like loving yourself and accepting yourself while also making room and making space to become healthier. So recently, we did forgiveness on one of our last shows. And I just was like, well, it's Venus retrograde. I'm just going to work on forgiveness. So, like, every night I've been doing some forgiveness. And, if it pops into my head, like, I've been doing forgiveness. So, I asked a friend to pull a card for me the other day, and she got forgiveness for me. And I was like, oh, I'm not surprised. But what was interesting is that it didn't feel like it didn't feel completely right, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But then I had an energy session yesterday, and she was like, you have to forgive yourself. Like, I've been going back to the trauma anniversary, like, um so something that happened to me when I was 15 has been showing up a lot in my current reality. Like, energetically, it's been showing up, and like the things that I've been triggered by, and just all of, it's hard to like unravel it sometimes because it is so deeply connected. Um, so she was like, it's you forgiving yourself really that needs to happen. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I've been focused on like forgiving everybody else and like um, forgiving the situation and like accepting that, everything happened how it should, but I wasn't really forgiving myself for really for me, like it ends up being like I can be very hard on myself. And it can be like, I think as a human being, we can, what Jessica was saying, like we can blame ourselves for things that really we have no control over. There's lots of things that are happening in life that kind of get us to a point where we find ourselves in situations that maybe we don't consider them to be ideal, but they are meant to be happening to evoke some kind of change or some kind of growth in us, or maybe some kind of karmic rebalancing. There's so many things that are happening that we don't understand with like our limited humanness, that letting yourself off the hook for that and like forgiving yourself for how you responded when you were being triggered, or um you know being kinder to yourself, like having more compassion. There's so much that can be like intermingled with it that it can be hard to kind of take that step back. And I feel like with the energy right now, like it is a really great time for self-reflection. So even just as I was having that session yesterday, I was chatting a little bit with her, and then we did energy work, and I was just reflecting on, wow, even though it hasn't been ideal in a lot of ways, and it's still things that I want to continue to work on, I have responded so differently now than I would have a few years ago. So having those moments of like awareness can be just, it can help you to have that compassion with yourself, because then you're like, okay, I see that I'm actually making progress and I'm making growth um, with this. And it's not because, right, a lot of healing is that repetitive. It's like, oh my God, I've already done so much work on this. Like, why is this coming up again? That's why, because you heal it like at that deeper level. And it is, when things that are very traumatic happen to us, it does affect how we move through the world. It does affect how we see things. So it's like it would make sense that you would continue to have to come or get to come back to them. So do you have any like, are there any things that you can share with our listeners and me, because I want to know, that are helpful when you have those trauma anniversaries, like things that you can kind of do proactively to move through that, Jessica?
Yeah, so if there is specific times of the year that you know are going to be problematic, interestingly enough, I just had a trauma anniversary and I was just feeling very off physically, like my body was not happy. And it's been 10 years since somebody tried to rob me in front of my house, like in the middle of the day, and breaking my knee. It was a mess. And it was really physically hard for me. Like for the first time, was not able to use my body. I had to rest a lot with a broken knee. So it was really an interesting experience. And it's been so long. It was 10 years. So my mom had sent me flowers a couple days after, and it came up in my feed, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's been 10 years." So it was more of like a afterwards, um, which is interesting because like there for a while it was in my mind. So what I would do, a long answer, what I would do is when I knew that time was coming up, I would either like in the very beginning, because I felt unsafe in my home, I would actually leave. So I would actually leave and go somewhere for like a week during, time before into the after period, just so I wasn't in my home, because it happened there. And so that's the kind of things is, go spend time with your family, even if it's a friend, like, or, a neighbor up the street, like just trying to get out of that environment. Um, and I know there can be like, oh, well, it's not going to happen again. And trying to rationalize it. It's like, no, we need to feel safe. So for me, in order to feel safe, I needed to not be there during that time. I also there was a couple years where I had somebody come and stay with me. So immediately after, like I needed to feel safe. I needed to be away. And then when I had kind of nurtured myself to the point where I was like, okay, I had somebody with me for several days, and like we actually walked outside where it happened and we stood there and we talked about it, and I was able to process it. So the reason that things keep showing up is because it's in a loop. Kind of like if you think about your computer and it's spinning and it's spinning and it's spinning and it can't quite load the page. So, because of whatever happened, we get kind of stuck in a loop. So, it's necessary to process it. Now, I will flat out say I am not a fan of really intensive exposure therapy for PTSD and trauma. I don't like that. I feel like that doesn't take your nervous system into account. So that's why it's like, how can we make our nervous system feel safe? So how do we feel safe? And that's, there's a little bit where you can go out there. For me, it was a stretch. It was like, okay, if I'm here with somebody, I'm going to feel safe, but I still want to go through this. So how are we moderating our nervous system to feel safe? And just, little bites at a time. They're like you said, Robin, we keep coming around to it. We keep coming around to it. And there's different things I started traveling. I don't live on that, like, I don't live near that part of town any longer. I moved to a completely different part of town, but I started going back there to see a massage therapist. And so I realized I was like, oh, like as I'm driving, I start feeling anxious. And I'm like, okay, like I see what's happening here. So it's interesting because even like anytime I get on that side of town, I want to drive past where my house was. Like, so there is part of me that is like, I'll just land there. I'm like, how did I end up here? And it's like, okay, my being wants to do something with this again. So I'll drive through, I'll drive through past my house and just pay attention and be very gentle. But that's where I allow, interestingly enough, I'm not so much, other than that period of time where I was not physically well this last couple weeks ago, I allow my curiosity to take me into a way that I can, feel it. So I was like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. I'm gonna pull over. Like, okay, let's sit here. Let's use our senses, look, smell, see, like look around, like I'm safe. So really just locking that in and then reassuring things. Like, because I got to a point where I wasn't even really, I was having a hard time leaving my home after that happened. Like, because I didn't feel comfortable. Like I couldn't see 360 around my being. So even getting to the car, I'm like, somebody might come up behind me. So it definitely aggravated a lot of stuff for me. And because like I said, I've had trauma in other parts of my life. It's like that's the other thing. So trauma, it kind of builds. You think about the RAM in your computer. So things get going and you look and there's like, oh, there's 20 programs running. Well, something small could happen to us as adults, like right now, and it may be small and it could cause a huge reaction because there's so many things running. We're having a hard time to process that. So that's where I say all this because it's like so much kindness and gentleness, so much kindness and gentleness because, you know, there are things that have happened to me that I remember, but I've also kind of forgot. Like you put something up on a shelf, try to forget about it, and then something will happen and be like, oh God, I remember it and I feel it in my body. And it can be overwhelming. So whenever, for me, it's like whenever my body's freaked out, like whenever I start like feeling anxious, like I stop. Like I believe myself. I believe me. That's such a big thing. I believe me. I believe what my body is experiencing right now. So I stop and I give myself space. One of the things that's really helped me in general is doing less. Like I don't stack a busy calendar. And that way for me, I can show up early. I can just relax. If people are on time or not, it doesn't matter. Like, because that's what my nervous system needs. Like, I need to have that space. And not all the time, but stuff comes up. So if stuff comes up, I can be there with myself and be like, wow, okay. Oftentimes I find myself in wonder and curious and excited about the world around me. But driving to get a massage and I'm feeling anxious because of I'm in a different part of town. And it's like, okay, now I know what's going on with me. So we just have to make the pause is so powerful, it's so important, and that's what allows this stuff to come up. And then I also do regular unpacking. Like I've been doing the embodiment stuff for years at this point. And, recently I've been working on, I have this like heaviness, this constriction behind my heart, like in my back between my shoulder blades. And every time I fall into it, I have, flashbacks of abuse. And it's like, okay, can I be here for myself? Because what happens when something happens to us is we leave, we dissociate. So we kind of leave our body to deal with everything. The consciousness isn't there. So it's not easy. But when I'm like, oh, flash, okay, can I be here with myself in this moment? So I stop. I bring myself back into my body. I'm feeling what happened. I'm experiencing it. Not fun. But when I can sit with myself and be with myself, I literally feel release. I just feel like all of a sudden that story is told in a way that I can integrate it and my body relaxes. So that's what I can say is I'm not as uptight, I'm not as anxious, I'm not as strung out because I will relax into those things and then they go away. So anytime I keep having like a repetitive memory, it's because I haven't sat with it long enough and allowed it to just wash over me and move through. It's like, okay, play the whole video. And honestly, at this point, I've gotten to where I'm just with myself. So even if I do like that dissociate thing where we see ourselves, I come into my body and I'm just sending light and love. At the age of 42, I'm not there anymore. And what the best gift I can give my younger self is to be there with the presence. And I can be my own angel. I can be the one sending Reiki through that whole situation. And it is amazing. We have the ability to rewrite the past. We have the ability to comfort ourselves and be there for ourselves in ways that we weren't able to because we didn't have the skills, but I do now. Like I have the skills now to be there for myself. So all of this to say this is what I do for me. Um, when I work with clients, it's different. It's, what they need, how how to move through that. But I've been doing a lot of work for a long time. So I can sit with myself through it. Not to say there isn't times where I don't phone a friend, say I'm having a really hard time, especially people that know the experiences I've had and that are able to sit there and hold that for me. Not everybody can listen to what I experienced in my life. I'm aware of that. So it's important to have safe people and safe spaces, and not everybody can be that, and there's nothing wrong with them. You know, some people have experienced such darkness that it takes somebody else who can be there with them to hear that and hold space for that. So that's the other thing I would say for those of us that have trauma is it's important to find somebody that can listen, can hear. There are many really good therapists out there, but just because they're a therapist doesn't mean that they can sit there and hold space for you. So it's important to find somebody who can hear that, who can sit there with you while you're experiencing, whatever it is. And not everybody has that gift. So it's nothing wrong with you. I would say the greatest thing I ever did for myself was hold space for myself and and continue to keep trying to find people who could hear my stories and who could be there for me and also allow grace for those that couldn't and understanding like my life experience isn't meant for everyone to know and it's not helpful for everyone. So that's the other piece. I've never been somebody who just like broadcasts stuff out there because I know it doesn't necessarily always help. And ultimately that's what I'm looking for is to help myself. And if somebody wants to, hear about it, that's fine. But it's really like for me, it's about discretion and using discernment. So there's no reason to, traumatize others. And secondary trauma is a real thing. So even as therapists, you can have that.
I want to go back to what Jessica was talking about with sitting with yourself, because I think, you know, like you can have that thought of like, oh, I'm always with myself, but right, Jessica was also saying that we leave our bodies a lot. I'm familiar with this one. um, I that was like such a huge trauma response for me. Like growing up, I felt a lot of things and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I would leave my body a lot. Like my energy would kind of get more in my head, or I would just be completely disassociated from what was actually happening. Like I had awareness around it, but I wasn't like fully present in my body. So um it's like it's funny because I was reading, I've dabbled in Buddhism, so that's one of the things that they talk about is like inviting that emotion in or inviting that memory in and like sitting with it. So um, we have a tendency to want to hide or to run from the things that are challenging. I used to, it's so funny when I realized I was doing this. So when I used to have really bad anxiety, I would try to run from the anxiety, which would just make me more anxious. So when I realized like, oh, just sitting with it. So what does that look like? Maybe your hand on your heart, like maybe doing some tapping. I feel anxious right now. And it sounds silly, but like you stopping and taking that moment where you're just like acknowledging how you feel, that has changed my life more than, like I've done same as Jessica, like we've both done a lot of work. That has been something that has changed like my day-to-day experience in really profound ways, like just being able to sit with and or to acknowledge what I'm feeling or what I'm experiencing. Um, it really is like that helps you to become more embodied. It helps you to become more centered and more grounded and more in your own sovereignty. So what does that mean? Like calling more of your energy back to your aura, to your energy field, or whatever you want to call it. Like when we are disassociating or when we're reacting out of trauma or triggers, like our energy is leaving our field. So we're not, that's why you're not able to be fully present. Like I remember reading this once years ago and it just fascinated me. It said that when you're triggered, it takes you back to like the energy state of a 5-year old. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating, right? That's why when you see people lose their shit sometimes you're like, oh my god, they're acting like a little kid. That's why, because you don't have um the tools or the awareness to like to deal with what's coming up. So the more that you have that sense of grounding, the more that you have that sense of like coming back to yourself, yes, you might still be triggered, but you get to a point where you're not like your nervous system isn't like freaking out. And I'm still working on that, like for sure. There's been over the last year, there's been a few situations that have taken me back to that, responding out of those fears or those triggers or those traumas. And it's been something that I've been very aware of and like, trying to work on. Um, so yeah, just be gentle with yourself because it is, right? It's I always call it the gift that keeps on giving because you work on these things and you work on these wounds that you have and you just are able to kind of get deeper and deeper with that energy and with the things that you're looking at. That was a hard one for me to kind of accept, because it's like it's very frustrating to feel like, oh my god, I've done all this stuff and I've healed all these things and then you still have the same, like a smell or somebody's tone of voice or a situation that can pull you out of like your centeredness so quickly. And you're like, God, what's happening right now? I know logically that like this situation is not my past. I know that this situation is not what previously happened to me, but your body and your energy does not know that. That trauma response that you have, it does not know that. So, communicating about those things and sharing those with people that you love and that you care about and that you feel safe with, is really important because, having those things get triggered and then this person that's with you, they don't understand or they may not know that you've had these situations. So it can be helpful to like, and sharing to the extent, obviously, that feels comfortable for you. Um, that can also be very healing for both people because we have a tendency to take things personally. So this situation that's triggering you, and then you respond kind of in a way that seems out of like out of your nature or seems out of proportion to what's happening, the other person doesn't necessarily understand that or get that, you know? Um, so I feel like this is also a really great time to do that with all of these planets in retrograde, with the eclipse. We are kind of moving into this new energy and this new way of being um, that is opening up, I believe, like more transparency and more, um, just the ability to talk more freely about those things and to be able to share those things with people that we do love and trust. And if it's not somebody that you trust or that you love, don't share it with them. Not like Jessica said, not everybody gets to know your story. You could just very briefly share like, this is reminding me of a past situation, or this is bringing up some past trauma for me. Even just that could be helpful for somebody to know. um, yeah, I don't know why that wanted to come through, but it did. I think I also needed to hear that.
Well, and I really like that because it's about boundaries. So I get to just say, I'm having a hard time right now. I'm being reminded of some stuff that happened in the past. And when they're like, "Oh, do you want to talk about it?" No, I'm okay. I just wanted to let you know. But I was reading somewhere, I heard somebody talk about this idea like a boundary is saying, "No, I don't want to talk about it right now." Like, and having that respected. And for me, that was just like, oh, because there are times where I feel pressured to respond to stuff. Like people will ask me questions and I'll keep answering the questions, and then I don't feel good anymore. And that's like that permission slip of part of respecting somebody is when they say they don't, oh, tell me about that. No, I'd rather not. And then respecting that. So for me, we're moving more and more into this idea of sovereignty. So that hits a couple of different pieces here. When I set a boundary, I expect it to be respected. And if it's somebody who is very close to me, who I care about and who I love, like, okay, I understand you want to talk about it now, but is that something we can talk about in the future? Because I also don't like that lack of transparency. So with people that I'm very close with, it's like, I don't want to talk about it right now, but I understand the importance of me talking to you about this. So there's also that piece of like understanding the give and take in a relationship, and then also setting boundaries. And it may not be important for this person to know. And so to say that, like, no, I don't want to talk about that, and for them to respect that boundary, and not keep pushing, this idea of not invading and not evading, but just to be there. And that's what we need to do for ourselves too. So, not invading, like going in and, like, what is all this stuff? I'm ready. Like, get it out. Not doing that because we don't want to, you can't pop the pimple before it's ready, but also you don't want to run away from yourself. And I found myself doing that. Like, I would get triggered and then I would run away. And it's like, well, that's what I've been doing. I've been running away from being with my body through dissociation. And I didn't have any, I was doing the best I could at that time, but I have more skills now to sit with myself. So that's one of the other reasons why I continue to be with this is this embodiment. I want to be in my body. I want to, it's not about the higher chakras. It's not about, the throat and the third eye and the crown and all. It's about these lower chakras, like being in the body. So it's about the earth star, the one below our feet. It's about our root chakra. It's about our sacral and our solar plexus. It's about those chakras. So how much, there's so much high frequency going on, solar flares, the astrology, all that. How much of that are we embodying? And we can only embody all of these higher frequencies to the level that we can embody our own being. So it's become so important for me to bring all of that in to ground it as deeply as I can. And in the process, stuff comes up. And so for me, it's a daily basis. Like it's a moment by moment basis where stuff is coming up and I get to invite myself to sit with it and say, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to take the time. And it's also made me, because I realize how often that I'm not necessarily triggered, but I remember things. like how often these memories are coming back, which is frequently. Uh, One, it's my body saying, "Hey, can we heal this now?" Like, that closet over there where you shove stuff, can we clean it out? Like that's why it keeps coming up because our body wants to not store this stuff. It doesn't feel good. It's icky. And so we can sit with our body and help move through that. And so I do welcome those opportunities. Also knowing that if somebody who has been working on this for a really long time, and being with myself is having kind of this flow of things to continue to process, imagine what everybody else is experiencing, including people that are not paying attention to it at all. And and working in, like I said, and working in mental health for so long, I see where trauma can bring people's lives, can bring them to their knees, can destroy their whole life because they aren't addressing it. And it's not, that's not even a blame thing. Like if you think about all the different situations that people find themselves in, like sometimes just being alive every day is a lot. So to even try to address that is a lot. So no blame there, but that's why I'm like, I need to be there for myself. And it allows me to be softer and more gentler. Like I've really noticed how much I've softened as a person due to my own working with all of this stuff. And I've been there. So the only thing that usually kind of gets me grumpy when it's like, oh, it seems like you're a little anxious. No, no, everything's fine. I'm like, okay, let me know when you're willing to accept the fact that there's something going on right now that's upsetting you so we can sit, we don't have to talk about it, but can we at least acknowledge that something's going on? And then I can just sit there with whomever, whatever they're experiencing. They don't even have to talk to me. It's just like, okay, we're having this moment. Let's just sit. Like, let's co-regulate. My nervous system is relaxed. Like, feel that, feel into that. So, and I think that that's the other thing too, is when we're able to be with somebody who's in a regulated state and we're way up here, like that allows us to co-regulate. That allows our nervous system to like, okay. So that's where it is important to not keep it all bottled up. It is important to have somebody that you can trust and talk to about this so that your nervous system can regulate. And that's the other piece too for me is really paying attention to my nervous system. It's hard to know when you're triggered. It's hard to realize that. Like I was waking up every morning at like 6:30 in the morning to get ready for work, and my mind was already running, racing. It's like that's not regulated. Well, so I've had to pay attention throughout my day, regulate, 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 deep breaths, even, crossing your hands and doing the tap. Like this is my favorite thing in the whole world. Crossing your arms and tapping, like it regulates you so quick. It regulates you so quick. Because even there's sometimes when I'll go stand out on the earth and I still don't get very grounded because like I am all up here. So like this just like brings you down. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And as I paid more attention to my nervous system, then I've been more available when thoughts come up to process them. And then that reduces the load. And then I can move through life a little bit easier. So that's where I think it requires work, paying attention, awareness, and just consistently working. And now I'll just check in. Like now I'm more aware and more sensitive in my own nervous system. So when I start getting a little like it's already like, whoop, Jessica, pay attention. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, let's relax. Let's calm down. So just getting in the habit of checking in with yourself is like the first step. And it's a huge step. And if you can catch yourself quicker than you did the day before, the Dalai Lama made that quote, if you're only angry for 4 hours instead of 8 hours, you've done something. So if I'm only triggered for 4 hours instead of 8 hours, then that awareness has helped. So that's where it's just like, for me, I didn't like how I was responding to the world around me. I felt like I was overly critical and sharp. I didn't like that. So this has all been to help me be more compassionate to others. And the only way that actually worked was when I did the work for myself, when I was more compassionate for myself, when I nurtured myself, when I showed up for myself. I was actually teaching myself how to respond to other people. So now I just do to others what I do to myself. And that has made all the difference.
Yeah, it's funny that when you have changes in your life and then those old patterns or ways of being want to come up. Like I've had that recently where, all the work that I've done on my nervous system and like, connecting with myself and staying calm. I've had a kind of a big change in my life, and I've just noticed, not completely that I'm going back to my old habits, but it definitely is an opportunity for me to be aware of it and to shift again, to that, like you said, that constant checking in with, okay, how am I feeling? Do I need to take a break right now? Like I find myself getting annoyed. I find myself like really irritable. It's probably a sign that I need to go take a break and like ground or clear my energy or whatever it is. But our a lot of times our because we're creatures of habit, we are reptilian beings, like we want to go back to those old patterns a lot. So helping yourself to break those patterns and to break those energies. I'm going to ask the universe for some support because I've been like setting an alarm on my phone and the alarm goes off and I just ignore it. Like I'm like, okay, I need to be open to how else I can have those pauses throughout the day. Yeah, because Jessica was saying this earlier. It's like our energy and our being, our soul is always wanting us to come back to wholeness and wanting us to become healthier and to heal. So we're going to be presented with those opportunities that stretch us or that push us past where we currently are because we can do so much. Um, we can be constantly evolving and growing. Um, I believe that like I'm going to be healing and growing probably until the day that I die. Maybe not to the extent that I'm doing it right now or that I had to do it 10 years ago, but that also feels good to me. Like I don't think I would want to have a life where I wasn't, having that opportunity to like um, to expand or to like healing and growing for me is it's enjoyable. I like seeing that progress. I like seeing the things that I continue to overcome. So again, I don't know. Maybe at some point I won't be doing the growth and or maybe it will become less frequent or it already has, right? Like when you've been on a spiritual growth journey for even a few years, I think it does kind of shift and evolve. I was chatting with actually an old coworker earlier this week. Um, so in my mid 30s, I had probably what was a nervous breakdown, but it really was like the beginning of my spiritual journey. So it was like a huge um, dark night of the soul, whatever you want to call it, spiritual awakening. Um, I don't think I'll go back to that place again, thankfully, because that was a shit show on a lot of levels, but it really did. I'm thankful for it. Like it's funny when you talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry that you went through that." And I'm like, in my head I'm thinking, "I'm not." Or sometimes I'll say like, "Oh, it's cool. Like I'm good. You don't need to be sorry for me." Which I think goes back to like who you want to share those things with because
Yeah.
we do have a tendency to, "Oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you." It sucked in the moment and I struggled a lot then, but it actually made me a better person, to go through that experience. So yeah, it's quite interesting to also notice like other people's projections, when you share things with them. Because we're all at different points in our journey and with the things that we're working on that maybe for that person, they have something similar that's happening and they're in a really rough period with it. Um, yeah, but I think like for me, like coming back to the belief that I have that like we live in a loving universe and even when things are super challenging or not where we want them to be, like ultimately there is something that's good that will come from it. even if you don't see it right now, even if in the moment you're like, oh my God, it's some kind of um, growth or understanding or whatever it is that you want to call it. That's what I believe. How about you, Jessica? I mean, through all the things that you've been through, like, does that help you to kind of come back to that belief or?
Hmm. It's interesting. That's something I can say. I still like, I do believe that we live in a benevolent world. I do believe that, things happen. So I want to say things happen for a reason, but it's yes and no.
Yeah,
I honestly believe that when we come into this body, we have a level of awareness. Like, this is what you're signing up for. It's like, wow, I don't want all of that in my package. But we can see the full picture. So
yeah,
I don't believe like these things happen to us in that way. Um,
yeah,
and I can see there is, I don't know how to exactly describe it, but there is a wisdom behind things, like the way things happen. It's just like, that probably wasn't really chance, was it?
hmm
But I won't lie, like I still kind of struggle with it. Like even recently, like, did I really need to go through that?
hmm
Yeah, I don't know. So me and my human 3D body, like I wish I could have skipped all of that. We are, in my mind, many of us are star seeds and we're here to have this experience. And 3D isn't easy. It's hard. There is evil in the world. It does try to stop us from our mission. So that's just the piece. Like I honestly believe that when we chose to come into these bodies, we said, I'm going to go into that war zone. And so we're here. And there's many beautiful things, but it's not easy and bad things do happen. Um, I'm a little less into the whole karmic thing, like some point in time we were a horrible person and then this happened. Nah,
yeah,
maybe shit just happens. And maybe there is something behind it, and maybe there's not. But 3D world isn't easy. Being in these human bodies isn't easy. It's just not. And we're very brave and courageous to be here and to be alive and to continue to use whatever's brought to us and gain some wisdom from it. Like that's where it's like, you know what? I will find the positive in everything. Like that's just the optimistic part of me. So with all of my experiences, if nothing else, I can say because of what I've experienced, I can be there for others who have experienced. Like the dark doesn't scare me. I'm not
hmm
afraid of the dark. I can sit there no matter what people have been through, I can sit there with them and hold space. And and that's a gift. Like I didn't realize until I realized most people can't do that.
yeah,
So if for no other reason than the fact that I can be there with people who have experienced horrible things, that right there is worth it to me. It's like, yeah, because there's something beautiful about being able to be with somebody in their darkest moment, in their vulnerability, who's willing to do the healing and say, okay, I will sit here with you while you experience whatever is coming up because knowing that they're wanting to heal. So, if nothing else for me, that's kind of what I hold on to. And that's where I've landed recently is that my life experiences have led me to be the person I am today and to be able to be there for people who have experienced horrible things. And that
yeah,
it's so meaningful. Like it really is meaningful for me to know I'm not alone, for them to know they're not alone. And that's really where we're at this point. Like I already know I'm not alone, but to let other people know you're not alone. There are people who have had similar experiences, maybe not the same, maybe not as bad, but there is somebody out there who can listen, who wants to listen, and who wants to hold space while you heal. And that's why I say
Mhm.
it's just that's like the most important thing is to continue to have hope that there is somebody that you can talk to because there is. And that's what I had to hold on to. That was
Mhm.
probably the hardest part of all of it was not that I experienced it, but that I didn't feel safe telling, my family at the time. I didn't feel safe telling anyone. And that when I did tell people, they didn't believe me.
Yeah,
So to actually be able to tell somebody your darkest moments in life and for them to say, I believe you,
Hmm.
something like that happened to me, and you can get on the other side of it, that's it right there. That's the piece of it.
Yeah, and I like I'm probably not saying that I don't know if I believe that everything happens for a reason. I mean, I think that we grow and evolve from things and like finding that like in whatever way you can find peace with it. Um yeah, because honestly, I still there are things in my life that I can still like I'm, like a 5-year-old with the universe. Like, why is this happening? Like, I don't understand, like our humanness kicks in for sure. But I agree with you, like being able to, I think that's another huge part of how we heal is like being able, for some of us, like being able to offer that presence and that support to others can also be very healing. There was a long period of my journey where I had a lot of imposter syndrome around being a coach or being a healer or whatever you want to call it. Because I didn't have formal training as like a psychologist or a whatever, as a mental health counselor. But what I realized is like, wow, me going through all of this stuff and then like healing through it, like that's my, for me, that was like my experience, my on the job experience. And I did do trainings and like, all the things, but um that's been such a huge part of my own growth and my own healing was to like be able to hold that space for other people. Because it does, it helps you to see things in a different way. And there's actually been, and this is something that my family, so I'm not going to share it, but my family, a few of my family members have been um, having an experience the last year. And just being next to them as they go through this experience has taught me so much about having a lot of gratitude for the life that I've had. Because, yes, it's been challenging. Yes, I've had things that I've had to go through. There's always somebody out there that is struggling more than we are, right? And I hate to say, like, y'all know I don't mean it like to negate what you're going through in any way, but a lot of times showing up for other people can help us to realize, like, I do have a lot to be grateful for. I do have so many blessings in my life. I do have a really amazing, supportive, group of people around me, or I am loved, or I'm really like, it can just help you to realize that things aren't as bad as our human selves can want to make them sometimes. It just can give you some perspective on things when you are able to show up for other people in that way. So yeah. All right, Jessica, how do you feel? I mean, I feel like for us not knowing what we were going to chat about, I feel like we chatted about some really good stuff.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it kind of goes back to something you said, Robin, because I think about my life and I've had all these different opinions about, what I've gone through and like how I want to feel about it. And, there are times where I was like, yeah, things happen for a reason. And then I was like, well, maybe it's karma. Like all of this to say we get to change. We get to change our mind. Like we get to say, I don't agree with that. We get to be angry at the universe. We get to have all of these big feelings. And that's the other piece is like, allow yourself to not know or allow yourself to say, yeah, that doesn't feel good. Like, because on the other side of it, it's like, yes. And that's where it's like I'm mindful of how I share what I share because of people not knowing how to respond. And I even have grace for them because I can say there's plenty of people that have said things and I'm like, woo, God bless me right now because I need a moment. Um, but just having grace for them and their discomfort. And that's kind of where I've grown to is like understanding that when I share these things, oftentimes I'm going to have to manage the discomfort of somebody else or not share it. And even when I say that, it's like, yeah, we're not necessarily here to manage the discomfort of other people either. So you get to be like, yeah, I don't have time to manage your discomfort around my trauma. All of this to say you get to be in all these different spaces and you get to be mindful about what's best for you. And it may be like, yeah, I don't have the energy right now to share all of this and deal like I don't want to. So Be open to changing your mind how you feel about things. You may be okay one day and the next day you may not be. You may completely change your belief system around all of this stuff. And that's okay too. If we thought the same thing every day, then we wouldn't be shifting and growing. So allow yourself to feel different ways and sit with yourself no matter what. Feel the anger, feel the grief, feel the sadness, feel the loss, feel the joy. Because ultimately, why do I do this? One, for my sovereignty. I want to be more in control of my being. Like, and if I know when I'm triggered and I can be there with myself, then I don't feel so out of control and unsafe. And I also have so much more joy. I remember so much more positive things about my life and my childhood because I'm not just running the loop of everything that went bad. So it's really helped me change and not be so negative. It's like, oh, well, I don't know why I'm being so negative. Well, because there's something caught in the loop. So when we can address that, it's like, oh, that opens me up to being more positive. So all of these are just symptoms that we can look at and have compassion and be kind to ourselves. And I think that that's just the biggest thing is like, you get to change your mind. You get to think something different and feel things differently and have a completely different belief system and be flexible and adaptable and growing and experiencing and loving and being kind and gentle to yourself. The more you can do that, the more you open up to all these other things and you let people be who they are and you let yourself be who you are. And that just feels like so much easier. And it's allowed me to feel a lot more vulnerable and be a lot more vulnerable around people, like where I'm at, where I'm feeling. And I've noticed as I'm able to share that with others, like vulnerably speaking, like this is how I'm feeling right now. This is what I'm experiencing. It opens them up and then dialogue can really happen. Then we can really get to know people and not just the masks that are showing up. So it's beautiful, brave, courageous work to be in these bodies, to show up and be graceful and to be with others, you know?
Well said. I like that. You ready to wrap up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all, as always, for joining us. Let us know how you liked us just sharing off the cuff, because that was very much sometimes, sometimes we'll chat beforehand and we'll kind of come up with a theme, but today was just us going with whatever was coming up. We kind of did our pre-talk live instead of doing our pre-talk. Um, yeah, so let us know how y'all are feeling during this eclipse. Let us know what is changing for you, what you're excited about going into this new year. Um, Thank you. Share us, like us, subscribe to us, all the things, say nice things. Yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Thank
See
you.
you next time.
I can see the stars align, dance around the moon every night. And now my eyes are open wide, and the sky has never looked so bright. And I don't need to see the road to believe, to believe.